Hello, everyone, and welcome to this roundtable discussion about the future of work. I'm Julia Smith, editor of ESSEC Knowledge, which is an online resource dedicated to sharing the research of ESSEC professors. Here with me today, I have David Sless, Ioana Lupu, and Caroline Strauss. So Caroline Strauss is a professor of management sorry about that. There we go, turn off the sound. So Caroline Strauss is professor of management, and her research interests broadly explore individuals' relationships with the future, so including looking at how people take initiative at work. And Ioana Lupu is an associate professor of accounting and management control, and her work looks at concepts like how professionals behave at work, including concepts like time and identity and temporal experiences. David Sless is also professor of management, and his focus is on new leader development, building leader resilience in the face of diversity, and on building productive working relationships. So how today is going to go is that first, each professor is going to give an overview of their research, and then we'll have some time for questions from the audience. So to kick things off, how about David, let's have you go ahead.
So first, thanks for taking the time during your lunch today to in a sense, talk with us about the future of work. So as Julia was mentioning, so my name is David Sless. I'm a professor here at ESSEC. I've been here just for the past year. So before that, I was a decade at Georgia Tech in the U.S., and before that, University of South Carolina, and before that, PhD and a career in management training consulting. But in the sense of my research, so there's an old adage that people make the place. My research focuses on how the relationships between people make the place, which actually has a big sort of reciprocal relationship now with everything that's happened with pandemic and other things. But more specifically within my research, so I've really focused on relationships at work from the very get-go, and how leaders create relationships with others, and how new employees can create those relationships with the leaders. So many of my findings have focused on, and was sort of the first one to look at this idea of how, especially as new employees come into organizations, for many, many years we focused on how organizations, in a sense, one way socialize the newcomer, and ignoring tribal effect, where really we experience by our relationships with others. So for example, with 15 telemarketing organizations, found that the newcomer supervisor was really the only influence on the newcomers' identification with the organization and how they adjusted to the job, where they basically forgot as soon as they left any orientation program and any organizational structural thing that the telemarketing organizations have done. In the sense of newcomers also face a lot of adversity at work as they come into a new job. And so as they face this adversity, then obviously they need resilience. They need to be able to bounce back from these different bumps along the road. So they're not going through trauma per se as new employees, yet they are coming into a situation where they're new. They don't know who they are yet, right? So who they were previous. For example, if you're looking at new accountants or professional service, so I was at this other place, I'm still an accountant, but who am I here? And it's this sort of liminal state in which they have to adjust, and it creates a lot of questions for themselves, imposter syndrome, et cetera. So what we found with a large sample from the US Navy actually, was these new folks coming into Navy, so this is during recruit training. Anyone who's been through military training can attest that it's quite, let's say, adversity, rife with adversity. I went through a type of military training in the past, and I can attest to that. It's rife with adversity, lots of people yelling at you and stuff. And what's interesting is we found two things. One, the drill instructors, what we would call drill instructors, or the recruit division commanders, they had a huge impact on being able to build the newcomers' resilience. So it's not the Navy was doing all these types of things, but really the key is if the recruit division commander had a supportive leadership style. Didn't mean they coddled them or group hugs or those types of things, but that they were willing to treat them as individuals, willing to treat them as humans, basically, as members of the organization, and that helped them build resilience. Another study with the U.S. Navy we did was, and this was pretty powerful, is that we had the newcomers, the new recruits. They're very controlled in being able to talk to each other in their division, in their military unit. So during training, it's super controlled. They have maybe, I would say, probably 10 minutes a day they could actually talk to someone else in their own division. So what happens is that as we gave just 2 times during the 8 weeks, where we had 2 of 4 divisions sit them down, and we have recruits pair up and talk about their experience. And we taught them a little bit about how to have that identity-based conversation, and that made a huge difference in their resilience. So two examples of my research around relationships. Should I pass it off?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Ioana Lupu. For the last about 10-15 years, I've been studying professionals in knowledge-intensive firms such as audit firms, law firms, consulting firms. So it's quite a specific population. So from at least one point of view, they are quite privileged because they are people with resources that can afford the help at home or childcare. So I wouldn't say that my findings will apply to the whole working population. But I've noticed in the last few years, and especially after the pandemic, studying work-life balance, overwork experience in the cases of these professionals, is that discussions about overwork have been moving front stage, whereas a few years ago, and at the beginning of my research, I could notice that many companies, many firms were framing work-life balance issues as something particularly specific to women and mothers. I think now and especially after the pandemic, I think everybody agrees that work-life balance is something that concerns everybody, and recent studies after the pandemic by Fatherhood Institute shows how fathers have also become more aware after the pandemic and about their needs in terms of work-life balance and the needs to spend more time with their children. So I think these issues are moving front stage for everybody. However, there's something, inequality. Inequality is still something present, and is still something characteristic of work-life balance. And I think the pandemic we've been through has laid bare some of these inequalities, and we've had, of course, reports, for instance, by McKinsey, showing how mothers were 3 times more likely than fathers to take care of most of childcare and schooling at home, and also they also were senior women were a lot more likely than men to think about scaling down work and even quit work at the height of the pandemic because they were suffering the burden of burnout due to their being stretched too much between work and their home responsibilities. And so my work, and particularly one recent piece of work that I've published with my colleague from Jonas Roca from IUM Lyon, focuses on understanding how overwork is experienced and produced in professional service firms. So on the one side, we looked at how organizational controls such as performance evaluation, culture, socialization, different types of assessments or timesheets that these professionals have to fill in and give an account of their time. So all these, we've looked at how all these types of controls shape professionals' temporality and push them towards working long hours by making long hours something that is valued, that is positive. And thus, we were quite intrigued to observe something that we called this paradox of busyness. So the more busy people got, the more busy they wanted to be. And even if their work-life balance deteriorated with lots of negative consequences on their private lives, relationships, and their health, they still wanted to be busy and thrived in being busy. And so we've looked at quite a large variety of busyness experiences, which range from extreme busyness to quieter times. And we noticed that there is a particular experience that they talked about, which we called optimal busyness. Well, this optimal busyness was an experience of balance between the pressure of coming from organizational controls and management pushing people to work long hours, and their own ability to control time, to feel in charge and in control of their time. And they describe this as being in the zone, as something positive, giving them and energizing them and making them feel very productive. So we noticed how people chase this type of experience, which was in the end quite a fleeting experience, and often that could often tip and transform into excessive busyness and burnout. And so we try to understand this and explain this at the interaction and at the intersection, as I was saying, on the one side of organization, the impact of organizational controls, and also see how people themselves on the other side, they were trying to shape and to get in control of their temporal experiences by manipulating for instance, the rhythm, the focus of their temporal experiences, trying to get the focus so as to increase productivity. So in the end, I think that what this study tells, it's also, I think, trying to be a bit more reflexive and critical about the discourses that we hear nowadays, that in order to do interesting work, you have to work very long hours, and in order to and you cannot be a good professional unless you are very committed and 24/7 committed 24/7 to your work. And because I think it's important to be aware that I think this is a myth, and we called it the myth of busyness, because it's something that I think it's important to be aware of it and of its negative consequences, that is pushing people to work long hours and to continuously search for this busyness, optimal busyness, attaining this zone, being on the wave. And it's important to that professionals should also be aware and enjoy quiet times. And take time for themselves, and not always chase for always the next piece of work, and always to try to get to be busy and to show that they are busy, and by being busy to show their value as professionals.
I'm really looking forward to discussing that. That strangely really speaks to me. We have to talk. I'm going to bravely start off with some audience interaction, always risky, particularly with such a large and rowdy crowd. So who here would like their job to have an impact, to have a purpose, and to be meaningful? Yes. Well, thank you. A large and overwhelming majority. You are not alone, of course. It's a post-COVID, and maybe now more so than ever, we think about like, what's the point, right? Why do we do what we do? What difference does it make? Some people talk about this as the great reflection that has come out of the pandemic, and I think this is a trend that is here to stay and going to continue in the future. This focus on purpose and on meaning, in part because it isn't new. We're currently repackaging it as this is something that has come out of COVID, but that work is meaningful and impactful is essentially an inherent human need, and is often listed as an important feature of a job, even ahead of things like working hours or salary or job security. And I want to talk about two different avenues in which a job can be meaningful, two different things that can make it feel like it makes a difference. Right? And the first one is, does it have an impact on the lives of other people? And that might be fairly obvious in some jobs, right? If the patient you have just operated on is now walking again, if the village you've just built a fountain for now has drinking water for the first time, you're not going to have to spend a lot of time pondering whether your work is meaningful. But in many other jobs, that is maybe less obvious. If we take our esteemed panel here, but we're all coming here with our research findings from projects we've worked on for many years in the hope that there will be an idea and a nugget that you will take back to your job, to your team, to your organization, and implement some change. It makes a difference. You now see something that you haven't seen before, but that may or may not happen, and if it does, we'll most likely never hear about it, right? So this impact on other people is not always that easy and that obvious in different jobs. And so the other avenue to experiencing a job as meaningful is, does it make a difference for the future? So we can debate the benefits of being in the moment, and we talk a lot about mindfulness and being in the here and now. As humans, we also have a desire to feel that what we do will matter beyond the present moment, right? Right, so zookeepers, for example, they experience their jobs as more satisfying and more meaningful if they think about them not in terms of feeding the lions and I'm cleaning up after the koalas, but I'm making a difference for the future by conserving endangered species. Okay, so we have these two different avenues to making work seem meaningful. But even if you have a job that you can easily frame in terms of that purpose, where you can think about the difference it makes for others, the impact it will have on the future, on a Monday morning when you're opening your inbox and there's all that backlog and responding to emails for the next 3 hours, it might not always feel that meaningful, right? So in our research, we look at meaningful work a little bit differently, not as something that a job either has or hasn't, but as something that people may or may not experience on a particular day. And we also look at what people actually do in order to make their job feel more meaningful. And we've worked with people from all sorts of different walks of life and lots of different industries. And we find that, yes, in fact, it's how meaningful we feel our work is, varies from day to day. It's not fixed. And it matters, and it depends, at least in part, on what we do on that particular day that goes beyond our job description, beyond what we're expected to do. And so one of the ways in which people create the experience of meaningfulness for themselves is by taking initiative and by being proactive. So trying to bring about a positive change at work, solving a problem in the way that it won't reoccur, doing something today that is going to pay off not in the moment, but at some point in the future. And that sort of creates that opportunity to transcend the present moment and to feel like, oh yeah, what I'm doing is going to matter at some point in the future. And we found that this is particularly true for people who experience a lot of uncertainty about the future in their job. And I don't mean job insecurity, I mean not knowing how the decisions that we take today will play out in the future. I guess that goes for all of us, for example. As researchers, we make decisions all the time about which projects and ideas to dedicate time and effort to, what to invest in. We follow our intuition and focus on what we think will be interesting, but then the nature of research means that what we think we will find, we don't. somebody else got there before, and eventually it doesn't pay off, right? So naturally, this kind of uncertainty about the future also happens in lots of other professions. So particularly when people experience this high uncertainty about the future, taking initiative and being proactive in our day-to-day work is actually a way in which we can experience work as more meaningful.
Great, thanks so much. It's always really interesting to hear about all the exciting work that's going on here at ESSEC. And your work has given me inspiration for some questions that I have for you guys. So I'm going to launch into those now. And then if anyone has questions that's watching via LinkedIn Live, feel free to pop them in the chat and I'll ask those as well. So my first question is, with the pandemic, how do you think it's impacted your area of research? Have you seen anything new coming out of that? We can start with you, David.
Sure. I think data-wise, and in my area of research, you could say organizational identification and relationships at work. I think we're still thinking about it. So here's my thinking on it. So I don't have data, but the thoughts. So you go back to what I started with, people make the place. So what happens when the place is no longer the type of place that you thought of before? Or we know from many years of research that a lot of, yes, relationships are important for organizational identification, to identify with the organization in which we work. However, the organization does put a lot of effort into the symbols, into the culture itself, the place, right? And as you take COVID into account, all of a sudden that place was no longer available to us. We couldn't go to that place. We couldn't access the same symbols. We couldn't access the same resources, the same structures. So all of a sudden now what became the place was this screen, however big that screen might be, whether your iPhone, whether your iPad, whether it's the screen on your, or you took your big screen TV at home and made it into your monitor as you wanted to have a different working environment, but that now becomes your place. So what does that mean? Well, I think that means that organizations are in for and already experiencing a wake-up call that we were all busy just trying to deal with the pandemic. But looking back, it's interesting where what happens when this shock comes from the outside and the organization doesn't also quickly think about what their place is, right? And now that creates this void for members of the organization. So is that one of the reasons why we're seeing a great resignation? I don't know. Is it busyness? I think it's all of the above, right? So in the sense of, that's one particular take, is that people make the place, but place also makes the people, right? So we have to, this for me heightens the idea of the things that go around in the place, right? The other thing I think that's gonna, as to relationships at work, is obviously relationships are a lot more important. If we didn't think they were important, now we know they're important, as we were searching for that connection. But then we were all zoomed out, right? We were completely tired after all our meetings every day. But I was talking with my friends, right, at work. But it takes so much more energy to do that virtually. So I think it's interesting too, remote work is really going to be where it is. But I think people are waking up to the fact of, well, I still like to be at a place. So trying to really ferret out what are the benefits of remote work? Why are we doing remote work? Previously, a lot of the logic for it was, well, because your employees will be happy. But if employees aren't productive, they're not going to be happy. And if we find we're not as productive by doing remote work, then all of a sudden we're not happy. Then the original logic for remote work is now gone, if you're following me. So I think there's a lot of unknowns still, but questions we have to get at, both practically and theoretically. So.
Yeah, so I'd like to pick up on some of the issues David mentioned. For me, sorry? Yeah, closer. Okay. Yeah. So I was saying that I would like to pick up on some of the issues that David mentioned, and particularly in my area of research. we've seen a shift from what used to be also a focus on. There was some kind of let's say, a balance between direct and indirect forms of control. And now this balance has shifted more towards direct forms of control, because the indirect forms of control, such as those through culture, peer control in organizations, were, during the pandemic that couldn't happen, because, where's culture when you don't meet your co-workers, when everything happens and it's intermediated through a screen, when the meetings, the informal meetings during the coffee machine, the water fountain, they don't happen anymore. So we've seen, I think, a shift towards more direct forms of control, monitoring employees' presence online, trying also to monitor more closely their working hours, whereas before professionals were filling their timesheets weekly. Now there were pressures on them to fill their worksheets daily, and they were controlled to do that. There were also different ways for managers to check their activity, if they access the different databases, the SharePoints for documents, and for how long they're connected to them. So, so we've seen this shift towards more direct forms of control, and I think that might continue in the future, because I saw that in a number of companies there's this tendency to increase the frequency of evaluation. It used to be maybe once or twice a year, or in some cases there were evaluations let's say after each project. But now there is discussion, and some companies or some law companies have implemented apps that can give instant feedback and evaluation to professionals. For instance, after a meeting, the manager can send them through the app a short evaluation of how they performed in the meeting. So I think, yeah, we're seeing an increase in evaluation, and that on the one side it's welcomed by some employees, because they on the one side they like this being given feedback, so they can also improve on that feedback, rather than hearing at the end of the year when the evaluation is happening that they haven't done very well, and then it's too late. So obtaining this kind of more continuous feedback, it can be perceived positively. Some also fear that it might become, it's just too intrusive, and it's like always you are constantly monitored and you're constantly measured against some kind of a norm. So we have these tensions that are emerging: visibility, invisibility, control, autonomy. So if the control is becoming too pervasive, continuous, and you're trying to measure and control all aspects of an individual's behavior and performance, then where's the autonomy that professionals have and should enjoy?
Right, yeah, I think we've covered a lot of ground here already. See what I can add. So it's an exciting time for those of us who study people's relationship with the future, and to study how people will see themselves in the future. So many of us had to revise that. So that's what we focus on in the project we collaborate on with David. And so for some professions, the pandemic has even called into question how they see their profession. So we have a study where we look at teachers and the extent to which technology changes and threatens what it means to be a teacher and what the value of a teacher is. And so We find that the more people started off at the beginning of the pandemic with this sort of view of technology as something that was going to change who I am as a teacher, how I do my job, found that these were the people who particularly suffered throughout the pandemic, more likely to experience burnout and so on. And I think we'll see these sort of ripple effects of the this accelerated technological change on a range of professions over the next few years.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see and kind of imagine how things will change over the next few years and how the pandemic has accelerated those, maybe for the better, maybe not always. And so you talked a little bit about how organizations are changing, how people's needs are changing, and to piggyback off that, is there anything that you think that organizations and managers can do to better support their employees for the future of work?
Oh, right. Goodness. Yes. Do you think there are things they can do? Yes. But if you sort of a manager or leader thinking about how can I make people's work seem more meaningful, the first thing I would say is proceed with caution. I think people have, if you excuse my French, a very fine-tuned bullshit detector. So companies engaging in a kind of like greenwashing, woke washing, meaning washing. I doubt that will catch on as a term. It's in a kind of like attempt to make people see that work as having a purpose. They feel is not authentic. It's very likely to backfire. So if that is something that you want to do, you better make sure that your rhetoric aligns with reality. Otherwise, I think you'll face more backlash than anything. But what can you do to make people's jobs seem more meaningful? Well, you can expose them to the people who ultimately benefit from it: clients, customers, end users. We know that, for example, from a study on fundraising callers for a university. So that's the people who will call you up and say, remember, you went to school with us, would you kindly give us some money? And so when these people even had a 5-minute interaction with a scholarship student, so the people who ultimately benefit from the funds that they raise, they improved the time they spent on the phone by 141%, they raised 171% more funds, simply because they had seen the impact that their work can have on other people. So where the nature of the job lends itself to that, that might be a worthwhile avenue. Where you can't, particularly where people face a lot of uncertainty for the future, what certainly comes out of our work is the value of giving people the autonomy to craft their own job and to take initiative in order to create that meaning for themselves in their work, and then help them see the connection between their day-to-day work and really who they want to be in the future. And that's obviously not that easy. So one of the things that we do in our work is we have a tool based on some of our work doing research that helps people see the hopes and aspirations they have for themselves in the future and how they all fit together. And that can then form the basis of conversations that you can have with that team member about who they want to become and how that ties in with their day-to-day job.
We have a saying when talking about control in organizations, and we say that what you measure is what you get. So I think it is important, and some organizations have increasingly became aware of that it's important in order to see an improvement in the work-life balance of employees, to have key performance indicators related to that manager's ability to empower employees, to allow them to have more work-life balance, and to foster sustainable development in the team and for an individual. Those key performance indicators have to be included in the key performance indicators alongside the financial indicators evaluating the performance of that managers. If we do not measure these aspects, such as managers' ability to foster and empower his or her team, then those aspects will fall by the wayside. They will not be taken into account by those managers. Will continue to focus, as before on short-term financial feasibility and performance. So I think it is important. And then another aspect that I would like to mention, in my research, we've seen so many attempts to change this overwork culture in professional service firms, and we've seen them failing over and over again. So I wonder really if change will come finally from inside, or maybe what we're seeing now emerging collective attempts to change the culture of organization. So in 2020 at the EY France, there was created a labor union of EY employees. So EY is this big four firm. And they are trying to promote and to to push the management to promote a better environment with a better work-life balance, and to push for overtime to be paid, which is not the case. And this is not an example of, for instance, at Alphabet in 2021, the parent company of Google. There's also a union of professional workers who was created, also militating for work hours to be respected and better work-life balance. So I think, maybe the future will maybe show that this type of movement can actually have a real impact on changing and transforming the overwork culture in these firms.
So it's really fun to hear the different perspectives given our research. So I think about the new employee experience and thinking about the pandemic. So what can managers do to support? You mentioned inequality, so I'll start there. As we think about and combine that with this idea that people make the place, but people still need the place to understand the other people, right? And so as a new employee comes in, if now you're working fully remote, one of the biggest recommendations is, if you're a talent development professional and a manager, is rethinking the new employee experience. So we talk about experience design from a customer standpoint, how the customer would live the product. We should think about new employee design, experience design, how the new employee would experience the organization, and how the experiences you want to design for them to have them become fully integrated into the organization. But as to equality, for example, with remote work, all of a sudden where we're seeing each other's backgrounds, where they live and work, in the US especially, there were worries and issues, and I have friends that we talked about this, where I'm in a minority. And because of things in my background, I'm afraid now people might have biases, right? That's already there at work, but now it's even emphasized even more. So there's things we can do from a equality standpoint, just simple as in new employees, when you're in meetings, and everyone should have their place background, so ESSEC or Google or whatever that background is, to, in a sense, allow everyone to be at Google or at ESSEC, even though they might be working from home. And then later on, if you and I are going to meet, you get to the point where you're comfortable turning off those backgrounds. So it sounds so small, but those become now symbols that become the place for the new employee to attach to identify with, and now can, in a sense, go into the background and allow the relationships to form and work and be able to collaborate with each other.
Yeah, that's super interesting, and actually leads me to one of my other questions, which is how remote work specifically could impact your fields of research. And so you've touched on it, on how people can adjust the new employee experience to make it more adapted for remote work. And I'm wondering what everyone else has to add, and if you have anything else to add on how working relationships can be impacted and by remote work, and also how we can kind of tackle that and potentially even use remote work to our advantage if that's possible.
I guess I'll keep going. I felt like I gave everything, no, but I think the other around remote work is, the question is, well, does everyone really want to work this way, right? So obviously we've talked a lot about hybrid and how we could work in a hybrid work environment and finding the right pace. Many times, and just like any change, so I think there's a disconnect between what the leaders of the organization may think the employees want and what the employees actually want in a hybrid, let's say, approach. But from a relationship standpoint, I mean, I think there's a lot of advice that relationships do need to be personalized, but they first need to be productive. So from a new employee standpoint, there is, yes, a lot to be said about disclosing who you are and so forth, but there's so much research that shows you need to check off the productivity first, and helping the new employees show to their tribe that they are competent, and then they're warm. There's the order of that can mess new employees up, and that becomes even more problematic if it's remote. So if you're trying to be, I'm such a nice person, then the assumption from the more tenured employees could be, oh, then they're actually not competent. Why did we hire them? When you're working face-to-face, they see that work. They sort of see what's happening. But remote, you've taken that away. So I think it ratchets up the suggestion that new employees need to show even more their competency in real, authentic ways, and allowing the warmth to come along with time.
I'd like to pick up on something that David was saying, so about newcomers, but not only newcomers, but also people, juniors. So they come with no previous, almost no previous knowledge or experience of having worked in the firm. And in the interviews I conducted, I was repeatedly told how difficult it was to socialize these people. In the professional service firm, they normally have, when they join the firm, they have induction weeks where they all go together. They attend those induction. There's also the creation of some sort of cohort culture, friendships, relationships between them, and also they learn quite a lot, these people, by watching the more senior. They sit together, especially in audit. They work in teams with different members from different hierarchical levels, from the less experienced to the very experienced partners, and they watch how things are done, how communication with the client over the phone or face to face is done. So there's also a lot of learning from just watching and being immersed in that environment. Of course, that during the pandemic that couldn't be done. What they continue doing was different trainings, online, virtual trainings. Of course, you learn the basic knowledge, you learn the theoretical knowledge, but then the more practical knowledge was totally missing. So that made that these people, this generation that they've recruited were not fully functional. So that put a lot of effort, put a lot of weight on the middle management, they had to pick up a lot of the work that was generally normally done by the more junior staff. This middle management in the firms, they felt very much burdened and compressed between the demands coming from juniors and having to do a lot of the work that they were only supervising before, and the demands coming from higher levels in the hierarchy, such as the partners. So I think. Going forward, I think there's a resistance from many of these firms many have accepted, of course, hybrid work, but how many days, that's also, we can see very different opinions going from, most of the partners I interviewed, they say that working from home should be an exception and really not something recurrent every week, but only in situations, exceptional situations, because this is the type of profession where interaction is very important. Not only, of course, there is also in terms of learning, how juniors learn from our seniors, but also interaction with the client and being there on the client premises, interacting with the client. So there's a lot of pushback from partners. It has been a lot of pushback on people to come back full-time to the office. And on the other side, we see from more junior people that they want more flexibility and yeah, many would rather settle on 3 days working from home and 2 days in the office rather than what's generally proposed now, 2 days at work, 2 days at home, and 3 days in the office.
And so this risk of the loss of interactions that Jonna and David have talked about, the sort of the water cooler conversations, the conversations you have around the coffee, naturally it would affect people trying to bring about change at work. So they're sort of taking initiative, changing the way the team works, making a change to something at a more organizational level. A lot of that depends on quite sometimes implicit and quite elaborate relational knowledge and strategic knowledge that often comes out of informal conversation that might involve sort of just gauging somebody's reaction when I first mention an idea, just seeing, how do they feel about it, all of which much more difficult virtually. But then on the other hand, for behaviors that are more sort of one-off, relatively low effort, speaking up with a suggestion, highlighting a risk and something, virtual communication can also be a bit of an equalizer, right? That maybe saying something in an email or in a chat room might eliminate some of these status differences that you have in a meeting that might prevent somebody from speaking up. Or if you think about more introverted people, if you're more comfortable with that. So I think we'll have to see how this plays out.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about how it's already changed the way we work and relate with each other, and what will happen in the future as that continues. And so since it means that we're going to have to develop, and we have already developed, new work habits, new ways of working, new ways of relating to our colleagues and staying connected with them, I'm wondering if you have any advice on how we can prepare ourselves, so not as organizations, not as managers necessarily, but as individuals, if there's anything we can do to prepare ourselves to be better equipped for the future of work.
Yes, right, so I have a few things to say about that. Yes, so essentially we're preparing ourselves for, jobs that don't exist yet, right? And for a future that is uncertain. And so this idea of having a clear job position in a particular organization to aim for, and that becoming the entire focus of our career ambition, I think we can move away from. Instead, what I think will be helpful to people is to think more about what kind of things do you want to be doing at work, what kind of relationships do you have with other people, what kind of environment do you want to be in, and how do all of these different hopes and aspirations you have for essentially your future self fit together, and then prepare for that rather than for a specific job role that may or may not exist in the future.
So I was talking earlier about this business ideology, which is quite prevalent nowadays. When we look at the successful, what's a successful model in today's business world, we see people like Elon Musk, who brags about working, how he works 100-hour weeks. And so talking to young people in professional service firms, they often tell me that they have this fear of missing out. So whether they are not present, they are not sufficient, they don't appear sufficiently committed, they do not pick up the phone or the email at 12 at night, they are afraid that others will do, and these people will be, successful and more successful than themselves. So there is this fear and anxiety that you are not, do not appear as committed as you should, that you do not work long hours, the long hours that others do. There's always this idea that you have to compare yourself and to measure yourself against more successful people. And so I would say that this is, I think this is it's not something that will lead to something positive. So, if I were to give an advice, it would be always not to measure yourself to other people, and not to. It's really about figuring out within yourself what are your priorities, what do you want to achieve, and not always chasing these ideal role models, and always fearing that you're not as good enough as, because I think in the end you can only be a loser, because there will always be people smarter than you, people who will be able to work longer hours than yourself, people who are more at ease in social relationships, and will have better relationships with the hierarchy than yourself. So it's really about I think looking inside yourself and figuring out what really makes you happy, and focusing on those strengths rather than chasing different fantasies or illusory role models.
So I want to talk about existentialism and love. I was trying to think of a funny hook, but I think if we think about the pandemic, if we think about conflict that is currently happening, war, these are things that create existential questions. Why do I exist? Do I exist? Am I going to exist in the future? I'm a pretty positive, optimistic person, and I remember around April of 2020, starting to go, am I actually going to pass away before I really imagined I would? I mean, that's a big, oh my goodness, right? I'm not going to say that spurred a email to someone over there around a job at ESSEC, but it might, right? It might have. Where as we think about who we are, we start redefining who we are. And so relationships, so the advice to individuals is, you can say we're starting to feel it's post-pandemic, maybe, and we're starting to be back at work. If you haven't had, let's say, relational inventories with your closest SWOs, significant work others, you might need to do that, because they might have reframed who they are, and you're working with them based on bad or old knowledge, right? Relational knowledge. So getting in touch, sort of checking in with them in the sense of, and you can be as direct as that, or do it on the sly, as they say. All right, second, love. So the great resignation, right, or the great reflection, or the great whatever. A friend and colleague of ours, Anthony Klotz, is sort of the person that's coined the great resignation. But you have all these openings. So a lot of the talk is around talent. How do we get talent? Because we have all these openings and we don't have people to fill them. But I think from an individual standpoint, what that means is within your organization, they may come and tap on your shoulder and say, hey, would you like this role? You would fit. And if you haven't been more open in the sense of who you are in the future, you need to think about love. So this is my acronym for it. So will you learn from the role? Will it open up networks to you, right? Does it provide value to the organization and to you in visibility? So it's sort of two V's in a way. So I guess LOV squared. And then the E is, will you actually enjoy it, right? A lot of times as individuals, we're presented with a role, and it's either we know the position we're looking for in 5 years, and this aligns, so yes, check, I'll take it, or it's, will I absolutely adore what I'm doing? And a job is a job, work is work. We might not love everything we do that we work. So as we expand our definition of loving the role, right, to learning, open value, and then we enjoy some of those tasks and process. So those are two things of advice I would give to folks.
Great. It gives us a lot of food for thought about how we can prepare ourselves and love our jobs and careers, how we can relate to others, and with the future as well. And so we have a couple of minutes left, so I'm interested to hear if there's any questions from the audience or if there's any questions you have for each other. Yes. You can, if you want, you can say it and then I can repeat it.
Yeah, okay. So about remote work. So I often ask myself, remote work versus normal work. I said, how do people employ themselves? How do they feel? Do they feel more productive when they work remotely, or when they, do normal working hours? And also, from the perspective of companies, do they think they have saved money with people working from home? And so if employees believe that they are also more productive working from home, does it mean that remote working hours, they should pay more, actually, compared, they should be valued more by companies compared to normal working hours? Also, given that it's actually, or it may be costly for people to work from home because, let's say they're working from home during winter, they pay heating costs, right? At the times where they were not supposed to be there, they can eat their own food, at least for some employees who receive subsidies from the employers for eating at the canteen. I mean, all these things. So how is it? How is remote work considered in terms of value by employees themselves and by companies?
So I'll quickly summarize for our virtual audience. So basically, what do employees think about remote work? Does this end up being more productive for them, which makes it of higher value to the companies? And then it gives us also the question of, could this be more costly if you consider heating costs, equipping your home office, stuff like that? So should remote work be actually perhaps compensated differently? So I'm also very interested to hear your thoughts.
So very quickly, so I think I'll just attack as for the employee side, right? So here you hear a lot of folks, and this is all just anecdotal for me, and people are starting to get data around this. But I think those that do deep work, remote work is awesome. So what I mean by deep work is when they're working by themselves, they're producing something that get handed off to someone else. But that work needs to be thoughtful and reasoned and complete. Whereas when you have constant iterations within a team that's super interdependent, that's where I think a lot of the employees themselves, so this is anecdotal, are saying, oh, I really want to, how can we make this virtual more effective? Because right now it's not cutting it. Zoom's not getting it. WebEx isn't making it happen for us.
Yeah, so I agree with David. That's also what I've noticed in my interviews, that it depends a lot on the type of work people are doing. And for some, it's excellent, you know, to be working from home because they don't have the interruptions that they have at work. And some at work they work also in open spaces, so there's a lot of background noise or interruptions. Whereas at home, they can, it's a quieter environment, and they can focus on doing work, and they think they are saying that they are more productive. However, some, especially in audit firms where working in a team is so important, also for knowledge transmission, as I was saying earlier, consider that working from home will not allow juniors to learn as much and to become good professionals. So it's also from a company point of view, I think while many companies would see the benefits in having to not having to pay less rent, I think some are slower to move towards more flexible work environments. Some have made this move. And are proposing flexible work environments where everybody can sit, take a desk and store their things in a locker. So you don't have assigned spaces. Everybody, it's really on a depending on how you come, you sit where's place. Many are more slow to move because many companies have already invested a lot of money to build facilities, to build large offices. It will take a time to get rid of those assets.
And to just highlight one additional point, which is what we've touched upon earlier, and that is inequality, right? So am I working from home in a luxurious home office with a door closed behind me, or am I at the kitchen table and there's childcare responsibilities at the same time, right?
So I think that's all the time we have for today. So thank you very much for sharing your research with us, sharing your insights with us, and I think it gives us all a lot to think about for the future of work, and also some advice on how we can get ready for it, and for those who are managers on how they can help their employees throughout the transition. So thank you very much.